Okay guys, we've got two questions today, both relating to the Lancaster square law and the idea that we can calculate war. So the Lancaster square law, if you're not sure what that is basically this old-timey thing where if you have two lines of musketeers and you shoot at each other, these equations can predict what's going to happen, who's going to win, how many people are going to die on one side or another. That's the idea. Now, I addressed this in the Nigel Ascay video and said, okay, this doesn't apply out of two guys standing in a line shooting at each other. At that point, it may work, but then it doesn't work in any other situation. And obviously, modern war is nothing like what happened in the Napoleonic era. So these equations don't apply, and also you can't calculate warfare. People disagree, and that's part of why these questions are asked. So Schmelzer says, "Hi Tig, in defense of the Lancaster square law, this is from a Russian point of view, where it also isn't called Lancaster square law but Ossipov-Lancaster equations. Yes, Ossipov made several changes because the simple basic Lancaster one clearly doesn't fit with the data of just about any battle. Then why are we bothering? There is no law in warfare other than listen to your logistics guys, you morons, or great S will happen." Exactly, so there's no law. So when two sides are shooting at each other, there's no way to know who's going to win, or who's going to rout, or who's going to be like heroic and win a Medal of Honor. There's no way of knowing that because you cannot measure it. But yet people think that you can. So basically, Ossipov-Lancaster equations are a start. And so, simply, they will basically never apply to any actual situation. Then why are we talking about them? Using Lancaster equation to model a battle is, well, like using a simple suspected infected recovered model to predict the virus thing. Let's not go into that. We're not allowed to go into that. All hail our censorship overlords. What the Russians actually do to make these equations still wrong but useful. So, just what the Russians actually do to make these equations still wrong, but useful. 2 + 2 = 5, guys, is wrong, but it's useful. In what way? In what way is that? Hey guys, I've just built this house on sand, okay? It's still useful though. Like, in what way? The house is going to collapse, okay? If the foundations of your principles are bad, making a lovely little complicated equation on top of that doesn't fix the initial problem. There is a factor denoting which proportion of the force is actually contributing to the battle. Okay. Combat efficiency is different depending on attacking and defending. Yeah, Nigel Ascay was like, defending is super stupid, which World War I didn't happen. An empirically derived factor such as the sigmoid function is included that symbolises the loss of cohesion and thus the loss of combat efficiency from taking losses. This is non-linear, and the shape of the our guys are routing function is up for a lot of debate. Well, it's going to be up for debate because you cannot measure human emotion. It's not possible. So, a significant factor in warfare is the human condition, and you cannot measure that. Is this guy going to rout? Is this guy going to be a hero? Is this guy going to win a Medal of Honor? Is this guy going to get wounded but still keep fighting? You cannot, there's no way to calculate that. It's impossible. So that's why it's up for debate. In other words, it's useless. He also says the humans rout much easier on the attack than on the defense. I mean, I don't know why you would assume that. I mean, I know why, because you're about to explain it. You say it's because the humans want to be in shelter, which makes sense, I guess, on a modern battlefield. It wouldn't make sense in years gone by battlefield, and so yeah, I can kind of understand that. But surely also, if the attacker has got outnumbers the enemy and has got massive artillery support, has planned out the battle extremely well, surely then the enemy is also more likely to retreat and rout. This is psychologically, the war is insanely stressful. The human instinct is to be in shelter, and the defender defends shelter while the attacker marches out of it. What the Russians believe is that routing happens when the results observed by the troops are greatly contrary to their expectations. Essentially, parts of the bystander effect, it's okay if I rout, the other guy of whom are plenty can still do it, as well as some other psychologically well-known effects, frequently conspire to make the relatively larger forces more routifying than the smaller ones. A corollary of this is that even if a Russian Soviet commander knows he outnumbers his foe, he will not tell his troops. He will also not trash talk the adversary's capabilities in front of his men. You still cannot predict a battle with this, but from thinking about it in these terms, you can derive relatively interesting rules, such as never tell your men that they outnumber the enemy, even if they do know that they outnumber the foe over the entire front. Say that the enemy is concentrating forces against them. Never badmouth the enemy capabilities. They are literally there's no advantage to that whatsoever. The equation governing human behaviour is wrong, but some can be wrong in a useful matter. Right, hold on. So he's basically saying that what the Russians do is mushroom manage their troops. And if you're, I don't know if the Russians have a term for mushroom management, but here is the technical definition of mushroom management. Keep them in the dark and feed them bull. In other words, keep them in the dark and feed them S, right? Because that's what a mushroom is like. So, to give a good example of this, I had the same problem when I was a manager in retail. One manager I knew believed that if he didn't tell anybody, any of his subordinates, and didn't train them on anything, they would all have to come to him. He could then make a decision, and he would then be the great manager guy because everybody would have to come to him. So he would always have use. Everyone would necessarily bow down to him in order to get information out of him. He would make all the decisions, and his ego would be stroked, basically. So that was his mushroom management style. Keep them in the dark and feed them BS. I had the opposite view of, no, tell everybody everything, give them all the information, and make them make the best decisions. You know, if you train your guys to be as good as they possibly can be, yeah, some will make mistakes, yes, not everybody is the exact same, but they will hopefully have more information. They won't necessarily need to rely on you unless it's something ridiculous. And therefore, my job as a manager will be a lot easier because they all know what to do. And so I'm only really dealing with the problems, not, the bigger problems, not the day-to-day stuff. But the point is that these are two opposing styles of management, and some will argue one is better than the other, but I would argue that mushroom management is terrible. I don't think it works. Yeah, okay, don't badmouth the enemy's capabilities, perhaps. Maybe you don't want to underestimate your enemy, but at the same time, we need to motivate the guys. We outnumber the enemy. We're going to win this battle if we do it all right. No, obviously you don't want to be stupid about it, but you could be like, okay, if we get this right, if we break through the lines, and if we get to such and such a location, this is it. We're going to win, right? And oh yeah, great. So I need everybody to put their 100% effort in, rather than what's going on? I don't know what's going on. I know. Let's rout, right? So I don't necessarily think the Russians, if this is what the Russian army is doing, I don't necessarily think this is a good idea to be keeping their men in the dark and feeding them BS. I think actually having all the information and being able to make your own choices in a conflict can actually really benefit you. But this is, again, the Russians are trying to keep their soldiers in line, and you will stand there and like a square equation and get shot at, and you will not run away. It's like, yeah, I think Alf Craig's tactic, we should allow people to have their own view of the world and act on it. But that's called delegation. That's called decentralization. Of course, the Russians, the Soviets, which believe in social hierarchies and socialism, they're not going to want to do that. And it's the same with the people trying to calculate war. If you're trying to calculate the human condition and you think it's possible, you just need to get the right set of calculations, then of course, why don't we centrally plan the entire economy? Well, the reason why is because you can't, right? And that brings us to the second question. Okay, second question is by David. He says, "Hello Tick, just became a patron for the first time on YouTube. Thanks for what you do. I know you're very busy, but may I ask a couple of questions that you can address in a future video?" The first question is about horses and cavalry. We're not going to get into that today. But we will come back to it because you mentioned it at the end. But the second question is what we're going to talk about. was very intrigued by your statement in your video refuting Nigel Laskay to the effect that basic economics tells us that human behaviours cannot be predicted with math, thus invalidating the idea that behaviour in combat and combat results themselves can't be accurately predicted, if I've understood you correctly. Yeah. A. For those of us short on economics training, can you explain which principles say this and why? This alone might merit an entire video. Yes. There's 2 books that I'm going to recommend, and the first one is Human Action. You don't need to read it all, it's a big book, but you can read the first portion of it, and the first chapter or 2 he explains this principle, the idea that humans act, hence the title of the book, and that we're all individuals and society itself is made up of individuals and humans act in their own self-interest. He explains that history and economics are both one and the same sort of thing, and what they're doing is they're studying human action, which has actually got a name, it's called Praxeology. Obviously you'd have to read the full first portion of the book to kind of get this idea, but I'll give you a quote which kind of sums this up. History is the collection and systematic arrangement of all data of experience concerning human action. It deals with the concrete content of human action. It studies all human endeavours in their infinite multiplicity and variety, and all individual actions with all their accidental, special, and particular implications. The subject matter of all historical sciences is the past. They cannot teach us anything which would be valid for all human actions, that is, for the future too. The study of history makes a man wise and judicious, but it does not by itself provide any knowledge and skill which could be utilised for handling concrete tasks. The experience with which the sciences of human action have to deal is always an experience of complex phenomena. No laboratory experiments can be performed with regards to human action. Historical experience as an experience of complex phenomena does not provide us with facts in the sense in which the natural sciences employ this term to signify isolated events tested in experiments. The information conveyed by historical experience cannot be used as building material for the construction of theories and the prediction of future events. Every historical experience is open to various interpretations, and is in fact interpreted in different ways. The postulates of positivism and kindred schools of metaphysics are therefore illusionary. It is impossible to reform the sciences of human action according to the pattern of physics and the other natural sciences. There is no means to establish an a posteriori theory of human conduct and social events. History can neither prove nor disprove any general statement in the manner in which the natural sciences accept or reject a hypothesis on the ground of laboratory experiments. Neither experimental verification nor experimental falsification of a general proposition are possible in this field. By the way, this is why psychology is not a science. It's the same thing, because you're studying the human action. It's not a science in the same way that physics is, or mathematics. So that's Human Action by Mises, and the other book I'd recommend is Socialism by Mises. Again, you can find this online, free PDF at Mises.org, and I'll leave the links in the description. Now, in part 2 of this book, he specifically addresses what's known as the socialist economic calculation problem that Mises himself identified. You can't predict human behaviour. And that's the calculation, it's partly the calculation problem, because when you get into a giant hierarchy of society, like a corporation or the Soviet Union, when you got something huge, or even military stuff, when you get to that level, it's so complicated and there's so many factors in there, and without prices, as in buying and selling prices in a shop, without them there is no chance. Prices allow you to calculate to a certain extent. They can't predict the unpredictable, but they can help. And that was the socialist economic calculation problem, because once you get rid of prices, and that includes free market prices, so you might have prices but they don't reflect reality. Once you have that prices aren't real, or prices don't exist, at that point the whole system breaks down, and that's what Mises was arguing. But the same thing applies to history and military as well. Without prices you cannot make economic calculation. So it's like, well, what am I going to have for breakfast tomorrow? There's no price involved with that. So there's no way to calculate it. I have 20 tanks and I'm driving towards Moscow. Have I got a chance of actually getting to Moscow? Okay, let's break out the math book. There's no way. There's no way of knowing. So that's the basic principle there. And as I say, you can read about it in Mises, although obviously he doesn't talk about the military stuff, but the principle still applies. Does this mean that you're not a fan of military war games or simulations of the tabletop variety, not computer? If not, why not? Which do you think best simulate combat, if any? Advanced Squad Leader, Panzer Leader, Conflictor Heroes, etc, etc. If none, why not? Advanced Squad Leader was what turned into Close Combat, which was the series that I started this channel off with, which are now private because you can't. YouTube's funny with that. So Close Combat was actually used as the training simulator for the US Marine Corps in the 1990s, which is why I really liked it. I also played Panzer Corps, which is the follow-up to Panzer Leader. That's fine as a hex-based strategy game. That's good. I like it. I don't think I've played Conflict of Heroes. I have played Hearts of Iron, and obviously I'm talking about computer games here. Hearts of Iron 4. Great logistics. And there's other games as well, and I've played many of these games on the channel back in the day, but obviously you can't see those videos now. In terms of board games, to be honest, I haven't played tabletop games that much. I did play Dungeons and Dragons, but that's not a realistic one. I played Warhammer for a bit, Warhammer 40k specifically, but again, they're not realistic. And if you're rolling dice, right? If you're using a d6 to calculate whether you are hitting an enemy, well, I'm sorry, that's not realistic, is it? Let's be honest. Even if you use a d20, and even if you score a 20, that's not realistic. So I don't think... Look, I'm a fan of computer games. I'm a fan of tabletop from what I've played, but I'm not going to tell you that that's a realistic simulation. Think about Panzer Corps. Panzer Corps is hex-based. I don't know about you, but there's not many hexes outside my window. Right? We don't live in a hex-based world, so it's kind of fun and, whatever else. I'm not saying games aren't fun, but it's not real. It's not realistic. If you don't think combat on any scale from tactical to strategic can be well predicted, what impact do you think this has on war games that militaries regularly conduct, on paper or physically? Do you think they're less useful in a predictive sense than many think? As someone who participated in quite a few war games while serving in the military, I'm very curious about this. This is besides the usefulness that physical war games inarguably have in preparing units for combat physically, operationally, mentally, procedurally as a dress rehearsal. On that note, can you think of any physical or paper war games conducted during World War II that saw fruit in preparedness for actual battles? No. It's like training. Yes, if I reload the rifle enough, I will eventually get good at reloading the rifle. That's going to be useful in the warfare. Similarly, having giant units coordinate together and move across a battlefield, simulating to some extent warfare, will get your guys prepared, as you said, physically, operationally, mentally, procedurally. Having generals, stand around a table, pushing little units around, trying to guess what the enemy might do, could give you insight into what the enemy might do. But you cannot predict what will happen in real life, because the enemy might not do anything like what you thought they might do, right? You might come up with 20 different scenarios that happen, and in reality, they pick 21. Right? There's no way to know that. So I don't think you can predict what's going to happen. Not only that, it's like Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. That's what Mike Tyson said. And it's the same in warfare. It's not about necessarily planning as such as being trained and prepared and able to think of ways to react to scenarios, which is where the war games might come in. Now, there were war games in World War II. Famously, there was the D-Day war games, where some people actually lost their lives in those war games. And so, that prepared the troops for the battle. But again, that was physically, operationally, mentally, procedurally, not necessarily because they predicted what was going to happen. Finally, you're clearly not a fan of Nigel Ascay. I don't dislike the guy. The only thing I didn't like was the way that he responded to my videos. And, look, if you're going to criticize me, or, let's say somebody disagrees with me on this video, the way to do it is this. Tick, I've listened to your point of view. I don't agree. Here's why. What do you think? Tick, I get what you're saying, but I have some questions. Would you mind answering them? Oh, yeah, sure. Tick, I'm not sure about this. Am I understanding you correctly? Or have you not explained it right? Something like that. That's fine. When it's, you're an idiot. I mean, not saying Nigel K said that. I mean, he kind of implied it, but he didn't, some of my commenters are like that. Like, rah, you're an idiot. I hate you. I'm going to tell everybody not to watch your videos. It's like, why has he not replied to me? Or I'm going to make stuff up about you and jump to stupid conclusions, which is what a lot of people do. I'm not naming any names of other channels that have done that, or other people on Reddit, for example, that have done that. So I don't mind what Nigel K is doing, and I don't hate the guy. It's just his response to my video wasn't what I would expect from somebody else who was going to critique my video. If somebody has a problem with my video, critique it nicely. That's all I'm asking. So he says, before I saw your video, I recently bought Volume 1 of his Barbarossa series, which is of course all about combat simulation. What is your opinion on his work in general? Would you consider doing a review of at least his first volume? If not, I probably will. Well, I encourage you to do it. I'm not going to do it. I mean, from what I've heard about it, it's basically... So he lists all the units that were there on the first day of Barbarossa, how many tanks they had, how many artillery pieces for each division and stuff, and then uses that to try and calculate how effective each unit was or whatever. That's what I've heard. I mean, look, as far as getting the list of artillery pieces and tanks and how many rifles they had and all that sort of stuff, that's one thing. That's okay. But then using that to calculate war, again, no. Now, obviously, if you're trying to make a computer game, that might be useful, because computer games are based on maths, aren't they? Binary code at the essential point. So you're going to have to put some calculations in there, probably. Okay, fine. If you want to try and simulate it in that sense, that's up to you. And that's what you're about to ask me in a second. So if you want to make a tabletop game based on what Nigel K has written, that's fine. That's up to you. But I'm saying that I don't think you can use that then to calculate war, or, oh, well, we can calculate why exactly the Germans did really well at early Barbarossa using all these numbers. Not necessarily. I ask all of this because I'm in the process of doing academic research on and designing a tabletop simulation game of a particular American Civil War cavalry battle, and I am curious about your opinions on the topic of simulation in general. Do it. Don't be discouraged. The problem isn't that, making a computer game or tabletop simulation of a particular battle isn't necessarily a bad thing. The issue is that you cannot use that then to make predictions. If you want to simulate combat in a computer/tabletop setting, yeah, sure, use math. But I don't think that's going to be accurate. And it's not good for real life purposes. If somebody's in the military right now thinking, how can I predict the future battle? Well, it's not a science and it's not an art. I know there's Sun Tzu Art of War. It's not that either. It's like history. It's a praxeology. It's a study of the human action. Hence why Mises had his book called Human Action, because that's what it is. You're not studying math. You're not studying art. You're studying a craft. And history is the craft of history, as I said in my history theory video. So yeah, when it comes to war, it's a craft. It's a bit of art, maybe a bit of math in terms of, how do I angle a gun to fire at the enemy that is ahead of me? Fine. How many rounds have I got left in my ammunition pouch? That's all science. That's hard science. But then at the same time, the human element of it is not scientific. So thanks so much for your time. Don't stick to tanks. Don't worry, I won't be. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye for now.